Welcome back to In Response EDH. My name is Albert, and today we have another great EDH gameplay video for you. Make sure you stay tuned to the end of the episode for a special announcement. On today's episode, we have some familiar faces. Jesse is back, and he's playing Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. He keeps an opening hand of Cultivate, Noxious Revival, Demonic Tutor, Windswept Heath, Blood Crypt, a Plains, and a Mountain. Daniel is also back, and he's brought with him Selvala, Explorer Returned. He starts the game with a Twilight Shepherd, Zendikar Resurgent, Wrath of God, Dragonlord Dromoka, Maze of Ith, and 2 forests. Mike is back, and he's brought Atraxa and her friends again. He starts off with an Astral Cornucopia, Arena Rector, Humility, Swan Song, 3 Visits, Razorverge Thicket, and a Henge Gate Pathway. Last but not least, we have Matt, and he's showing off his Negan the Cold-Blooded deck again. His opening hand consists of Anguished Unmaking, Bolas' Citadel, Jeska's Will, Jeweled Lotus, Bojuka Bog, Graven Cairns, and a Swamp. With the introductions out of the way, let's start the game.
Nice. You guys good?
Yeah,
ready?
Matt starts us off by playing a Windswept Heath and passing. Jesse plays a tapped Overgrown Tomb and passes. Daniel plays a Homeward Path and passes to Mike. Mike drops a tapped Indotha Triome, and on his end step, Matt cracks his fetch, paying 1 life, to search up a tapped Godless Shrine to the field. He then plays a Command Tower and taps out to cast Drannith Magistrate. Jesse draws for turn, shocks in a Blood Crypt, taps 2 mana and casts a Prismatic Omen, and ends his turn. Daniel plays a Maze of Ith as his land for turn and passes to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Razorverge Thicket. He taps 2 to cast 3 Visits and searches up a tapped Zagoth Triome to the battlefield. Matt draws for turn and plays a Spectator Seating. He moves to combat and attacks Jesse for 1 with the Magistrate. With nothing else, he ends his turn. Jesse plays a Mountain as his land drop, taps out to cast Cultivate, finding an island to the field tapped, and a forest to hand. Daniel plays a forest as his land for turn, and passes to Mike. Mike untaps and draws for turn, and plays a Mist Gate Pathway. He taps out to cast Teferi, Master of Time. He ticks it up to draw a card and discard a card. Matt draws and plays a Swamp. He moves to combat and swings his Magistrate at Teferi. In response, Mike activates his +1 ability to draw a card and discard a card. Teferi takes 1 damage and goes back down to 4. On his second main phase, he taps all his mana to cast Pitiless Plunderer and ends his turn. Jesse starts by drawing a card for turn and playing a Windswept Heath. He then taps 2 mana to cast Demonic Tutor and cracks the Heath to search up a Prairie Stream to the field and a card to hand with the Demonic Tutor. On his end step, Mike activates Teferi again, drawing and discarding. Daniel draws for turn and plays another forest. He can't do anything and passes. Mike once again activates Teferi to draw a card and discard a card on his end step. He then starts his turn by playing an Ancient Tomb, and once again activates Teferi's +1 ability. He follows that up by tapping out, taking 2 damage from the tomb to cast an Astral Cornucopia where X equals 2. With nothing else, he passes to Matt. Matt untaps and draws. He taps 1 white mana to cast Land Tax. He moves to combat and swings 2 power worth of creatures at Teferi. and in response, Mike does the thing again. With nothing else, he passes to Jesse. Jesse draws his card for turn, drops a plains on the field, and moves straight to his end step. Mike once again activates Teferi, but this time Jesse meets it with a Notion Thief, instead letting him draw the card and having Mike discard a card. Daniel draws for turn and misses his land drop, so all he could do is end his turn and discard down to 7. On his end step, Mike activates the Teferi again, already forgetting about the Notion Thief, and has to discard while Jesse draws. After that, Mike starts his turn by tapping 4 to cast Arena Rector, and ends his turn without activating his Teferi. Matt starts turn 6 and his land tax will trigger, since 2 of his opponents control more lands than he does. He plays a swamp as his land for turn, and casts a Fleshbag Marauder, but doesn't realize he's helping Mike out by having him sacrifice his Arena Rector. Allowing him to search up an Ugin to the battlefield. Matt moves to combat and swings both creatures at Ugin. In response, Mike activates the Teferi again to draw and discard. Ugin takes a hit and drops to 5 loyalty. After that, Matt ends his turn. Jesse kicks off his turn by casting Kodama of the East Tree. He then plays a land, and Kodama allows him to play an additional land due to his ability. With nothing else, he ends his turn. And once again, you guessed it, Mike activates Teferi. Daniel takes his turn, but misses another land drop, and moves to discard. As Mike declares he is activating Teferi's +1 ability, Jesse casts a Cyclonic Rift, sending the walker back to Mike's hand. But Mike forgets to draw and discard. Mike moves to his turn, and taps 5 mana to cast Doubling Season, but Matt responds with his pet card, Tybalt's Trickery. Mike mills 3 cards, and tries to cast Kaya the Inexorable, but since the Magistrate doesn't allow it, the spell just gets exiled instead. He follows that up by ticking up Ugin to bolt the Magistrate. After that, he taps 1 to cast a Soul Ring. He taps the Soul Ring and the Cornucopia for 2 white mana to cast Humility. Matt starts his turn by searching his deck for 3 more basics from the land tax. He draws a card and plays a mountain as his land drop, and casts Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter. As it enters the battlefield, he creates an emblem, allowing him to cast cards exiled with his +2 ability. He chooses to activate his +2 ability and exiles the top card of all opponents' libraries, but forgets his own. After that, he moves to combat and hits Ugin for 1, and passes the turn. Jesse draws for turn and goes straight to combat, swinging his 1/1 Kodama at Ugin, and taps out to cast a Conflux, allowing him to search up 5 spells to his hand. He chooses Wilderness Reclamation, Thousand Year Storm, Mirari's Wake, Merciless Eviction, and Leyline of Anticipation. After that, he passes to Daniel. Daniel draws for turn, and he finally gets to cast a spell, Huatli, the Sun's Heart. Unfortunately, it doesn't help him out at all, and he ends his turn. Mike starts by playing a Snow-Covered Forest as his land for turn, and taps 4 mana to cast his commander, Atraxa, Praetor's Voice. He then ticks up Ugin to bolt Matt's Tybalt, and then recasts Teferi, and passes without activating him. Matt untaps and draws, declining the land tax trigger, and plays Mike's exiled Arid Mesa as his land drop. He then upticks Tybalt, again forgetting to exile the top card of his library, and follows that up by casting Liliana Dreadhorde General. He ticks it up, creating a 2/2 zombie, and chooses not to attack and passes the turn. Jesse untaps and draws. He plays a forest, he casts a Ley Line of Anticipation, and pays another 4 mana to cast Wilderness Exploration. He then moves to his end step and untaps his lands with the Reclamation. Mike also activates Teferi, draws a card and discards. Daniel misses yet another land drop and can only end his turn. Before his end step, Jesse flashes in a Mirari's Wake. And Mike then activates Teferi, drawing and discarding. Mike starts his turn, untapping and drawing a card. He then activates the Teferi, drawing and discarding again, and ticks up Ugin, bolting Tybalt. After that, Jesse casts Merciless Eviction at flash speed to exile all Planeswalkers. On Mike's end step, Matt pays 1 life to crack the Arid Mesa and searches out a tapped Blood Crypt. He then starts his turn, playing a Plains and tapping 3 for a Crackling Doom to have Mike and Jesse sack their creatures. He follows that up by casting Daniel's 𝐤𝐤 the Shield Mage. He activates the -2 ability to create a 0/3 wall that becomes a 1/1 thanks to the Humility. He moves to attack and sends 2 creatures at Jesse, dealing 2 damage. On his end step, Jesse casts Noxious Revival to put Conflicts on the top of his library from the graveyard. He then draws for turn, taps 5 lands, producing 10 mana thanks to Mirari's Wake, and uses 8 of it to cast Conflicts again. This time he chooses Brass's Bounty, Doomsday, Reclaim, Swarm Intelligence, and Dragonlord Dromoka. He follows that up by casting a 1000-Year Storm and uses the rest of his turn to cast Dragonlord Dromoka. On his end step, he untaps all his lands with the Wilderness Reclamation. Daniel draws for turn, and his mana troubles continue. He discards down to 7 and passes. Mike draws for turn, plays a Bright Climb Pathway, and with no cards in hand, passes to Matt. Matt starts his turn by playing one of Mike's exiled lands as his land for turn. He moves to combat and swings 2 tokens at Jesse, who blocks a zombie with Dromoka. Dromoka is currently a 2/2 thanks to Mirari's Wake, and survives. But Daniel decides to use his Maze of Ith to take the zombie out of combat, and Jesse takes 1 damage. On his second main phase, Matt makes another wall with 𝐤𝐤. On his end step, Jesse casts Doomsday, paying half his life. In response, Matt casts Zot's Will, choosing to exile all cards from graveyards. In response to that, Jesse flashes in a Swarm Intelligence. Once it resolves, he casts a Reclaim and copies it twice, thanks to 1000-Year Storm and Swarm Intelligence, but only chooses to put 2 cards on top of his library, Revival and Treacherous Terrain. The Zot's Will finally resolves, and Matt makes a 4/4 Thrall. Jesse chooses Turnabout, Expropriate, Treacherous Terrain, Noxious Revival, and Time Stretch as his Doomsday pile. Still on Matt's end step, Jesse casts Brass's Bounty and copies it 3 times to create 40 treasure tokens. On his turn, Jesse uses 9 treasures to cast Expropriate and copies it once with the Swarm Intelligence. Jesse and Mike choose time, while Daniel and Matt choose money. This allows Jesse to take 2 extra turns, and he takes a land from Daniel and a land from Matt. For his second expropriate, Jesse, Mike, and Matt all choose time, and Daniel again chooses money. So Jesse takes one of his forests and gets 3 more turns. After that, he moves to his first extra turn. He moves straight into combat and swings his 2/2 Jamocha at Daniel. Then he moves to his second extra turn. He uses 7 treasures to cast Dune Blast, choosing to save his Jamocha and destroy the rest. In response, Matt casts a Boros Charm to give all his permanents indestructible.
Oh, okay, I didn't do anything.
He then casts a Noxious Revival to put Brass's Bounty back on top of his deck.
Then, I think I win the game here. I'll cast Treacherous Terrain. So I've cast Doom Blast, Noxious Revival, and now Treacherous Terrain. So whenever I cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it for each other instant and sorcery spell that I've cast before this turn. I've cast 2 others, so I'll copy it 2 more times. And then Swarm of Challenging says whenever I cast an instant or sorcery spell, I may copy that spell and then choose new targets for the copy. So I'll get 4 copies of 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 copies of Treacherous Terrain, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lands. So I do 52 damage to everybody.
What's Treacherous Terrain read?
Treacherous Terrain deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of lands that player controls.
Yeah, it's not your control, it's we control.
No, it's the I control.
He controls.
Yeah,
You control.
Treacherous deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of lands
That
player controls.
So you deal 2 damage to me, sure.
Yes!
Okay.
Yes!
In all the confusion, Jesse goes to attack Daniel and changes his mind and instead attacks Mike in an attempt to remove the humility, but the life totals never get adjusted. Jesse then moves to his third extra turn attacks Mike down to 2 and moves to his fourth extra turn. He draws a card and moves to combat again and attacks Mike again for 2 more damage. That should have killed Mike. Jesse then casts Time Stretch to take 2 more turns. He moves to his 5th extra turn and goes to attack Mike. Mike scoops up his permanents and then Jesse finally casts his commander, Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. After a little deliberation, they notice that Mike should have died last turn and let Jesse redo his combat phase. He then chooses to attack Matt, and I'll let them explain the rest of the game.
I'll move to combat.
You're taking out.
I'll swing at Matt.
Do you have any of his lands? Okay. So it's a 2?
5.
The humility is
okay.
gone, so it's for 6.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just dead here. You have another turn, right?
No.
This is your last turn?
Well, I have another turn, but I have to draw a card.
I'll take 5, 6.
Yeah.
So 1.
I was essentially trying to give the game to Daniel right now. Alright, I'm trying to give the game to Daniel.
Alright, well,
yeah, and then I move to my next extra turn, and I can't do anything.
Dang. You make 1 mana.
wow. Man, I can't use this turn
Honestly,
I just drew.
Ooh.
So yeah, I gotta pass. I'll just discard the Terminus.
Can we do 1 damage?
Maybe.
I can if I can just get
lightning ball.
white.
Yeah, that was the fatal flow. If your omniscience too, so you could have got
Yeah, the omniscience I didn't need is good. If I get it free,
Three your way.
I'll lost one of them.
You made one?
Yeah, because it
Oh, you take one?
Yeah.
Oh, 1, 2.
That's that one damage that you knocked.
I have Leaf out. I just not drawing.
I'll cast Negan. Yeah, I'll cast Negan. And then I will
I don't want Matt to win this game.
cast Reanimate, targeting Draneth's Magistrate, and then pass.
That's rough.
You don't have.
That's a good game.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like I said, I don't need Selvala. I need mana. I'm just gonna concede.
Wait, didn't he win from the Reanimate?
Wait, what?
Oh wait a minute! No, you killed
You
yourself.
killed yourself from playing Reanimate.
Oh yeah, you lose life.
Okay, sure.
Unlikely, the unsung hero.
I was like, wait.
Where was all my one mana?
I didn't read it.
You're good.
Yeah. New cards for me.
That's cool.
Hey, you
Is
always,
that what you want to play tapped?
you always stick it out. You never know.
Congratulations to Daniel. Did that game end the way you thought it was going to end? Who had Daniel getting a win while being mana screwed the entire game? Definitely not me. Jesse was going off, but unfortunately misread his card, and it was all downhill after that. Matt just couldn't resist killing himself since that's one of the things he's known for in our play group. I think he knew the game was his for the taking, and just forgot where he was. I want to take this time to give a shout out to Daniel. The entire game he was mana screwed, but never once complained or stopped having a good time, where most of us would have probably checked out and wanted to scoop. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, we got some exciting news. We just launched a Patreon. If you like our content and would like to support us, please consider becoming a patron. All proceeds are going towards upgrading our video equipment to put out the best quality of video we possibly can. And to kick off the launch of our Patreon, Daniel was extremely generous and donated 6 secret layers that will be given out over the course of the next few months to our patrons. Thank you to those who have already signed up. Your support is much appreciated and means the world to us. Well, that wraps up episode 18. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.